All right, guys, welcome back to another Real Talk episode. This one came in highly requested, and this is the optic topic for the shorties. So the 11.5s, the 12.5s, what optics am I running? What do I recommend you guys look into? And so with all that being said, if you guys do want to support the channel, please head over to rangedaybro.com. All of our loadouts, at least most of them for now, I'm still working on these, are over there on the loadouts tab. So this right here, this 12.5 Super Duty rifle, you can find over there all the parts, all the links for these parts, and if you use those links, it does support the channel at the same time. Also, don't forget to head over to the discounts page. It'll give you all of our affiliate links, all of our affiliate codes. So if you guys are interested in buying something, if you need something, then you could use my affiliate links and or codes, and it does support the channel. While you're over there, make sure you throw your email in to subscribe to our email list. We're going to be sending out like a daily deals type email. And then also subscribe to our Rumble account, subscribe to our X or follow, whatever it is. And then I think that's it. Oh, Patreon as well. If you guys want to support the channel further and have direct lines of access to me, request certain reviews, request certain Real Talk topics, you can do that over there at Patreon as well. So thank you for everyone who supports the channel. Now, free ways, obviously, liking, commenting, and subscribing. I know you guys never hold back your words on these Real Talk episodes, so I appreciate that. But let's just start with my main squeeze, which has been this 12.5 Super Duty for the last like 4 months lately. So the way I have this thing set up is very similar to the way I have my 14.5 URGI set up, and the idea behind it. I guess, you know what, let's just kind of divide this. I don't have this organized in any way. This is not scripted. So let's maybe just start with like theory, I guess. Let's start with a theory first. So what I have started, where I came from was anything shorter than 14.5 needed a dot on it because it's not capable, or, you know, it's made for those 200 yards and in engagements, and 200 yards and in, you don't need a magnified optic. Now let's just crush that myth right there. So if you don't need a magnified optic to hit a target at 200 yards, you certainly may need a magnified optic to see and identify and positively identify a target at 200 yards, especially if said target is not completely in a wide open field where you can see them head to toe. If it's some sort of urban environment, if they're just peeking out of a window, if they're behind a tree, it definitely helps to have magnification to be able to identify, is this the person I need to be engaging with, or is this some innocent bystander or whatever. You know, I don't like to talk scenarios, but like just thinking logically, you can definitely hit a silhouette steel plate, a man-sized target at 200 yards with a red dot. I'm not saying you can't. You can. People have done it. I've done it with no magnification out to 500 yards. Is it way less consistent? Yes, but we'll get to that. But you can do it. You can engage a target. You can hit a somewhat small man-sized target at those distances, but can you identify is the biggest problem. The answer is no. I don't care what you say. If you're in a war zone type environment and the enemy has certain uniforms, right, and you know what uniforms you're wearing, where the enemy's supposed to be, there's so many friendly fire cases in war which you could look up yourself. I've never been to war. I'm a dirty civilian, but you can look it up. It's very well documented. A lot of friendly fire occurs, and I mean, it's war. It's like the fog of war, right? I'm not saying not having a magnified optic is the reason for that, but maybe it wouldn't hurt, I'm sure, for those guys to have been able to look and see what they're actually shooting at before they pull that trigger. So that is why early on in my journey, I never had anything more than really EOTechs or a Holosun. Really, I started with Holosuns because I was broke, and I still am, but now the channel helps a little bit to pay for some of these things and things get sent out. But started with Holosun, moved to EOTech because I have astigmatism. The EOTech is way more crispy, so there's that. Let's just move to that because this is kind of where it's ended. So we started at the ending, unfortunately. So let's go to that first. Well, first and foremost, let's just show this guy right here. This is a pretty badass little setup here. This is the this is the Griffin Mark II lower with the Mark 18 upper. It's not an HK. Sorry HK. Did not mean to insult you guys. But obviously this is a retro build with a carry handle and a front sight. I bring this up because you should be able to use iron sights, at least know how to use iron sights, because these require no batteries, and usually it is the backup to the backup. This is like everything, all else fails, you know, you have iron sights. They don't fog over, the glass doesn't crack because they're iron sights. Now obviously carry handle, you know, is definitely dated. I just like the retro look of this guy. But I just say that to say, if you don't know how to shoot with iron sights, you should probably learn. You don't have to be a sharpshooter, but you should probably be able to ring some steel at like 200 yards or 100 yards with some irons, and then, you know, move on from there. It's always good to have backup irons. Are they really necessary nowadays? I'd argue probably not, but I just figured let's mention the iron sights because there's going to be somebody like, oh, you need irons, you know. backup irons, dude, or all I need is my iron sights and my M4. I shoot 500 yards or 1,000 yards. So let's start with the Sig Spear LT. This guy, obviously EOTech. I just bring this up because, again, this is really what I started with these shorter guns. Now, nowadays, knowing what I know now and given what I just said, and my piece of advice is if you're going to go with this, there's nothing wrong with that. Just get a magnifier for it. And I think my 11.5 right here, this guy. So we'll skip right past this. The only reason this doesn't have the magnifier on it right now is because this gun's been getting a little bit more love than it. But that's the beauty of a magnifier. You can easily swap them from gun to gun. So that's an 11.5 Spear LT, chambered in 5.56. And this is also an 11.5, just a URGI clone, I guess you could say. So again, the only reason this magnifier is not on that gun is because it's on this one, but it's on a QD lever, which is great. So you can quickly and easily take it off, stow it, pack it away, whatever, move it around from gun to gun, which is really cool. And yeah, so if you're gonna have a red dot or a holographic sight, highly recommend you get a magnifier. Now, this is the G45 magnifier, so this is a 5X EOTech magnifier. It has the HRF Concepts little kind of like 3D printed, whatever you want to call this, shell on it, I guess you could say. It protects the windage and elevation adjustments. This does not actually change your zero. It just zeroes the reticle to the magnifier. And this is both, these both have the Unity fast combo, so the fast riser and the flip to center magnifier. So really cool setup. This guy stows straight down. So if you're using with night vision, I would just pop this off, obviously give myself more room in my tubes. But again, just going back to the whole concept, you need magnification, in my opinion, to not only PID, but also to get effective hits at distance. So if you can't see your splash, and in real life, this is something no one really talks about on the internet, gun guys especially. In real life, there's no splash. There's no berm to tell where your misses are at, okay? I mean, there might be a wall, there might be, you know, but most likely in a wartime scenario, you're shooting through trees in a forest environment. There's just like open space behind your target, most likely. There's no like magical berm. Berms are like a cheat code, I've learned recently, because at my buddy's ranch, we've been shooting lately at 455, there's no berm. If you miss, you're going into some trees, and unless you can see your vapor trail, you know, with a spotting scope or through your main optic, it is very hard to call your misses. So that's something that people don't talk about enough, I don't think, in the gun community. So yet another reason to have some magnification. You know, obviously with recoil management and all that, it's going to be still pretty tough to catch your own trace depending on the distance you're shooting at, the caliber, the amount of recoil, so on and so forth. But that's something no one talks about. But again, getting back to this specific setup, I love the 100 concept stuff, guys. I know ARDs, people will say, will scream till they're blue in the face, you don't need an anti-reflective device. They've been used for like over 100 years in war, so they definitely have a use case. Now, whether or not you like this one or you think it's overpriced, that's up to you to decide. I like it. They did send it out for full disclosure, but I did buy some of their stuff before they started sending me crap. But again, that's for you to decide. But I have one on here nonetheless. I do have the EOTech single dot reticle on here as well. I love this single dot reticle. It does not have the donut of death. It's like an aim point, but it's a holographic. I don't know if it actually increases the battery life. That's something I should probably look up. I'd imagine it would, because it doesn't have that entire donut of death with it. But I really like the clean single dot reticle because it helps with passive aiming with night vision, and it just kind of declutters things. And the only time you want that donut of death is if you're like in a trailer going through doing some CQB stuff. Outside of that, I really don't. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a reference point for like a 7-yard holdover for like your 5,200 yard zero, but if you know what you're doing, you know where to hold your dot on your target. If your dot zero for 5,200 yards, just hold it like on the chin if you want to hit in the upper chest. You know what I mean? Something to train as well. Holdovers, when you have these risers and whatnot, you just gotta know your holdovers. But that's a whole other topic for another video. I already spent too much time talking about this. I do believe that if you're gonna have an EOTech, to have that versatility, to have it be super quick, up close and personal when you don't have this thing on, you need to invest in one of these eventually. That's the beauty of it though too. You could eventually invest in one of these. You could start with this and then save up to get this later on, which is a benefit of going with this type of setup as well. The negative is it's kind of heavy, I guess. It's probably not any more heavy than some of these other setups we're gonna be talking about here shortly, but is it capable? Yes. You are limited with reticle options. We're going to talk about with LPVOs, which is ultimately, spoiler alert, what I'm going to recommend. LPVOs that have holds, specifically the EOTech and the Night Force Attacker are the two that I have a lot of experience with. The Credo doesn't have those holds. Again, we're jumping way ahead, but you're going to have difficulties when you get out to those extended ranges past 300 or 400 yards. is really when these shorter barrel lengths start to get pushed around by the wind a lot more. And at that point, that's when those wind holds really help in an LPVO. And with a single dot, you're holding up above the target and off into space. So you're just kind of guesstimating. You're like looking at the branch that you're holding on while you're pulling the trigger, and then finding where your splash is, again, that really wouldn't exist in real life. And then you're trying to adjust, a little bit higher and a little bit more left of the branch or whatever it is, right? It just becomes a very big guessing game. So if you want to have a precise machine, and that's my whole point, is why not have the most effective, well-rounded weapon you can have, the most effective, well-rounded tool you can have. And this guy is master of CQB like it is, right? This guy is, yeah, you can do really good CQB with this setup, and you can kind of reach out, but you're definitely leaning more towards like the home defense type setup if you're running something like this. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just be aware. Now, what I like to do is I like to try to maximize the capabilities of said platforms, right? Because you can only carry one of these at any said time, right? So if I'm going to just grab one, which is the only thing I can really carry at a time, I want it to be able to do the most things possible. Up close and personal, really fast transitioning target, and also be able to reach out consistently to distance, because in a real world wartime scenario, real shit hit the fan scenario, obviously it depends a lot on your environment, but you're gonna have engagements that are gonna be much further than 100 yards or 200 yards, which is what most people are only able to shoot at their ranges, unfortunately. So this guy right here is an example of a pretty good but not 100% done setup right here. So this has the LPVO. It's the Trijicon Credo 1-8. This is the old version of the Trijicon Credo. So this is not a newer Credo. This is an older Credo, and it doesn't have any wind holds. It also has daylight green or red illumination. It's not daylight bright. It just is like noticeable. I do like that it has locking windage and elevation turrets on it, but this is not a review or a real talk about this scope. This is more so a concept real talk. So what do I mean by this is like kind of all the way, this is a good starting point. So you have LPVO 1-8, pretty good 1X, good high end, good top end of 8X. You're not just capped with a 6, even though 6 would be fine as well. You have the ability to go out to 8X, so if you want to go further, you can. The problem, and the reason I'm saying this isn't all the way there, is there's no wind holds. There was, back before the new Credos came out, there was one reticle option. There was not the multiple reticle options they have now, or I think the one they have now has wind holds. And also there's no ability with this Arkin scope mount to mount a top dot. I could always do an offset red dot, which would be great, but I like a top dot for passive aiming with night vision. I know a lot of people don't have night vision, but even if you don't have night vision now, it may be something to consider if you want to future-proof your equipment, so that if you're saving up for it, you can, instead of having to adjust and change your loadout completely, you can just plug and play. Offsets are great. I think offsets are actually faster. They actually allow you to maintain a cheek weld or a chin weld, at least, depending on the type of optic offset you get. There's ones that are taller than others, which we'll talk about here in a second. I guess we skipped over one. Let's just finish this one. Then we'll go to the ACOG. But essentially, I think that the offset is actually faster and more accurate and more stable when you're shooting, especially rapid fire, because when you're going top dot on some of these setups, you have no cheek or chin connection to the stock. So your 4 points of connection just went to 3. It's both hands and your shoulder, versus when you have, when you're down on the gun on your main optic or on an offset, you have your chin, shoulder, and both hands. So it does make a big difference. If you ever shot a top dot, it gets a little wobbly, a little squirrely once you start shooting fast. But it's not undoable, obviously, and under nods, everything's a little less accurate, right? But again, with that being said, we did skip over the ACOG, but that was a good tease to what the final synopsis will be. But let's just go back one step to the ACOG, because this guy, I have a lot of people asking me specifically about this guy right here, and this type of setup. So a prism optic and an offset, and I mean, Brass and Hop can probably tell you, they probably have way more time than me on the ACOGs. I mean, I just seen so many of their videos. They talk about these optics at length, and so they could probably tell you a lot more. Watch their videos. I highly recommend their channels. I love those guys. Put out really good content. But my experience with ACOG is just pretty much like theirs. I mean, it's just like, it is the lightest, most bomb-proof optic you can get, but with that, there's a ton of trade-offs. Like, The eye relief is super short. If you don't have to run a rear sight, great. You can get one of these Unity risers, Unity fast riser right here for the ACOG. But a bunch of ACOG aftermarket mounts have the ability to mount it backwards and kind of make it like a cantilever backwards towards your eye. So it kind of eliminates the problem with that. So you're not so much nose to the charging handle, especially when you got a nose like mine. But it's still, there's still that problem with the eye relief. You have to be really kind of choked up on that. And when you have not a normal shooting position where you're shooting off a barricade or any kind of other improvised shooting positions, it gets a little difficult to maintain that eye relief on the ACOG. Well, that's where the offset comes in, right? And again, the Unity Fast Riser has that ability to have, this is a 1.93 offset, so it's a little bit taller. So in theory, you could use this with night vision. I've tried it before. It's definitely not my number one go-to choice, but it works. But again, with the offset, you still maintain a chin weld. You still have the ability to very quickly engage targets up close and personally. It's a pretty good solution to the problem with the ACOG. But the issue is, for this kind of money that you're putting into this, I think that there's better options. And you're stuck with a crystal clear, may I add, but it's a 4X. So if you're like me and you really enjoy a higher top end magnification, this is going to cap you at 4X. So you have to be okay with not having the ability to dial in, dial out, whatever it might be. Also the reticles, they used to make an ACOG with an ACSS reticle with some wind holds. That's been long gone unless you buy one aftermarket for way too much money. Then you just can't get them. So Primary Arms and Trijicon did a collab back in the day. It's not around anymore, unfortunately. And this guy is just, I'm stuck with a green chevron and some BDC, stadia in there, right? And they're mostly kind of accurate for a 14.5. This guy's actually a 12.5. I misspoke in my other video, so I apologize. This is not an 11.5 Griffin. This is a 12.5. They sent me a 12.5 instead of the 11.5 I requested. That's okay. I'll take it. I'm a fan of both barrel lengths, as you guys know. But this guy is probably not going to line up with the BDC and the ACOG. I haven't actually zeroed it yet. I'm still waiting to get this thing in rotation. We have a good problem right now. We have a ton of things that I need to review. So with that being said, it's just been my experience with this Optic setup on the 14.5 Block 2, which this thing lived on for years, is that it's great, but it was great for like 20 years ago, essentially. I mean, it still works. It'll work for longer than I'm alive. But are there better options for your money? Because these are not cheap. I mean, the ACOG itself is, you could find them on sale for like $1,000 or $1,100, but then you're talking about probably $250 for the Optic mount, then another $350 for the offset. And, by the time you add it all up, you could have just bought an EOTech Voodoo, maybe not the scope mount, but you're going to have a lot more capabilities with that. So let's just fast forward to the conclusion and what I would recommend for most people, because when you're grabbing a gun, you can only carry one at a time. So we started backwards and we started with my recommendation, unfortunately, but I guess fortunately, whatever, you've been able to think about it now. This is the one I would recommend, or not this specific scope and top dot, but something like this. Because with a 1 to 10, it doesn't have to be 1 to 10, it can even be a 1 to 6, for instance. Whatever your budget allows for, get a good piece of glass that has wind holds. And I also think that if you're trying to get into this for like a budget type optic setup like this, and you're going to have repeatability, right? Like a backup to the backup, right? The Arkin 1 to 8 is probably the best bang for the buck. As far as I know, people don't like the kill box reticle, but it actually just works. And there's wind holds in there, and it's a really good glass. I really don't like the turrets. They're like, it's only an MOA. There's a lot of things that they could improve on that thing, but for right now, for the money, for like $300 or whatever it is, when you use code RDB, it's a phenomenal value. And if you get a good optic mount, something that's going to be solid, like the Badger Condition 1 here, or even the Arkins are great, but you can't get to the top dot with Arkins, so I would recommend going with something where you can add a top dot like the Badger Condition 1s, Geisleys, whoever else makes them with a top dot. There's like 1,000 different companies that do it now, but I prefer the Badger Condition 1 mounts, and just add a top dot to it so you can have passive aiming capabilities. Also for just really for up close stuff, great. It's not the best for when you're trying to rapidly engage targets because you lose that point of contact. This is a 1.7 inch height, so keep that in mind. It's my favorite happy medium for precision work. So it's my favorite for the day optic. Now, if I had to do it all over again with a 1 to 10 and the capabilities of this thing, would I shrink it down to a 1 to 5 and then have this be a little bit lower? I don't know. I would have to kind of see it. I don't have that experience with it yet. But if I can maintain a chin weld, if I did a 1.5 on this guy, and also this Holosun 509T up top has a little RMR like conversion plate, because the condition one only has an RMR footprint, not the 509T specific one. So I have to put a plate in there, which raises it up even more. Then if I can maintain a chin weld while bringing this down to 1.5 and being able to use the top dot with a chin weld, I would definitely do that, seeing this and doing this all over again, because most of the time, if I'm using my primary optic, it's going to be at 10x and it's going to be in the prone or off some sort of brace position where I can get a good eye relief and find that sweet spot on this optic. But this guy and the Arkin and the Trijicon, anything that's like decent is going to have a decent eye box, even at the top end. Obviously, it shrinks down, it gets tighter as you go in on the zoom. But first focal plane optics, which all three I just mentioned are first focal plane. If you didn't want to dial it all the way up to 10 or 8 or 6 or whatever you're running with, then you could dial it up halfway, or you could dial it up to 4x. You get the ACOG, right? Not the field of view, but you get the ACOG zoom, and then take it a little further, whatever you want to do. You might want to PID or glass with a top end 10x, and then you might like to shoot at 8 or 7.5 or 6 3/4. Who cares? You have options there, but this is kind of what I'm going to with all of my setups, and it's not just on the 11.5s and 12.5s. This is kind of what I would like to do with all of my guns, if at all possible. Even the 16-inch guns, even the 308 16-inch guns and the long-range guns, a primary optic with a backup offset red dot, either backup on top, or if I'm running like a laser aiming module up top, maybe for those larger frame guns off to the side with a backup optic. But the other thing that this thing really helps with, especially speaking back to that in a real world scenario, like finding our steel target at 455, we know where it's at and it's still hard to find. It's painted white and it's still hard to find. So being able to like point in the general direction that you know that target is with your top dot and then drop down into your main optic really helps you to like quickly identify and locate targets out the distance. So I really like that for that effect as well. So there you go, guys. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could show off the URGI since a lot of people love that build. It's a really slick build, I gotta say. Well, it's gonna be tough. Hold on a second. That's the one thing about these tactical walls that I really hate, is that if I want to take this gun off, I gotta move the one on top of it. So here it is. It's just the same exact thing, the Badger Condition 1 with the RMR on top instead of the Holosun. So a much more expensive piece of glass. This is the Attacker 1-8, as I mentioned, and this thing is phenomenal. It works really well, I gotta say. But for the money, for $3,000 for this optic, is it 2.5 times better than the EOTech? I would argue probably not. As far as durability goes, I'm sure, but I'm not one of these guys banging on my optics with a hammer, so I can't tell you that with confidence. But I do love this optic. I mean, it's really great. Would I do it again with RMR on top? Definitely not. Would go with something with a bigger window for sure on top. Probably like an Acro if they didn't have all the problems that they have, but we'll see. Some sort of mailbox. I just like the look of the mailbox as well at the top. It's just a cool look. But with that being said, this will probably, depending on, because this gun is kind of finding its way towards the back of the list as far as like my favorites, because it's long and it does have more velocity obviously than the 12.5s and the 11.5s. But I mean, if I'm going to shoot 500 plus, I'm not grabbing this gun anyways. I'm grabbing a DMR, the LMT, the HK, whatever it is. So again, I'm kind of leaning a lot more towards the 11.5s, the 12.5s, and just giving them the better glass that I have in my collection, because if I have to grab one gun to do it all, it's probably the 11.5 or the 12.5. Most likely the 12.5. So maybe this Night Force will find its way over there, and I'll end up putting something different, a little different on the top. Maybe one of the new Trijicon red dots if I could ever find one in stock anywhere. But I just wanted to shout this out because this is definitely like one of the nicest, if not the nicest optic that I own. So there's that. Again, Badger Condition 1 mount. This is also the 1.7 inch height. So for that top dot, I'm right about, like my beard is touching the stock, but it's not actually. If I go down to the chin, I'd have to turn my face like almost all the way. It's just it's a weird thing. It's not right. Like I'm aiming right at you guys right now. My head is turned way too far. This is where my head naturally wants to sit. And again, I have no connection right here to the rifle. So again, it's not a huge issue for 1 or 2 shots, but when you want to really run the gun fast and have that recoil management, having that chin there just helps way more than you realize. And you'll notice once you go to the top dot how that affects it. So, but with that being said, guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for watching, staying to the end. Hopefully you've commented, talked some smack by now in the comment section. If not, get in there. Let me know what you think. If you guys want to support the channel, rangedaybro.com for any merch, links, discounts, affiliates, all that's over there at rangedaybro.com. Also subscribe to our email list. Also Rumble and X, also Patreon. And I think that's pretty much it. Christ is King. Love you guys. Take care of yourselves. Talk to you soon.